if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A, but we do have tons of us here. So we already have a lot, but we're going to try and we've organized them, and we're going to get to them.
We are.
Okay. So do you want to start with some Penda?
Yes, this one is kind of in the category of getting out of my head. This person says, I have a lot of fears, anxiety about being bad at sex. How do I get out of this mindset? And they wanted to know that they're also queer, but how can they, you know, step away from the fear of being bad, quote unquote, bad at sex?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is recognizing that we're all vulnerable when we're in a sexual experience with someone else. And so bad isn't actually determined by one person. It's determined by, you know, what happens in that encounter between two or more people, and like how everybody feels about it afterwards. Okay. Like there's no magic. I did this, then I did this, and I rocked that. I mean, like some people feel that way because they have that level of confidence, but you know, you can do this, that, and the other thing. And if it doesn't work for the other person, then that wasn't good sex. Of just giving yourself permission to explore and to lean into what feels good while checking in and making sure that like what you're doing is on page with what they want and vice versa, because that's what makes the best sex. It honestly does. The communication about what's working and what's not working. What makes bad sex is no communication and a lot of assumptions and people just doing what they think they should be doing. And, you know, that's when the problems happen, in my opinion, because I've been there too.
I use a little thing called glows and grows. And it's like, if you're comfortable with your partner afterwards, you can be like, okay, what were the glows? Like, oh, I love when I sat on your face and that was an amazing glow. And then you can be like, the glow was, you know, we kind of were in this position for a little bit too long. Could we have switched it up? So just even like those kind of touch bases, if they're really quick after sex, just being like, this worked, are good practices.
Yeah, it's a practice. Yeah, it's a practice, and there can be things gleaned from every single experience. So yeah, give yourself permission to just be. And yeah, that anytime you have that thought gremlin of you're bad, just be like, you know what? We're gonna breathe, because we don't know if it's bad yet.
Thank you, Maisha. Here's one. Anything to say as people start aging? Is there anything new? Do you know if sensation changes, or any advice to people whose genitals are aging?
Yes. For female-bodied folks, we definitely lose our estrogen, and hormones in general become, you know, less balanced, I'll say. And that varies from person to person. But what we see as an overall trend is that lubrication is more difficult because of lack of estrogen. So dryness can be a problem. Get yourself a good lube. Get it. And then arousal might be more difficult, meaning you might find yourself needing more time, needing more or different types of stimulation. One thing that we do as human beings that drives me nuts is we think about something that works and we try to just keep doing it. And unfortunately, because on a cellular level, we are changing from moment to moment, as we age, we are also changing. And it's very hard to think about or reconceive of your sexuality when you've come to rely on certain things. And the same is true for male-bodied folks. We see around the 40 mark that penis erections can become more difficult. Maintaining erections can be a little bit more difficult too. And sometimes it just kind of disappears altogether for certain experiences. So that can be really disillusioning for people. And just knowing that your sexuality is changing as you age, to begin with, just knowing that and like sort of embracing like, yeah, things are going to be different. I found that actually is way more helpful, especially with my clients that I work with who are kind of going through change of life stuff. Is like letting go of that older sexual self, the younger sexual self, I should say, and embracing like some of the different ways that you can experience pleasure. It can look and feel different and not qualitatively worse, you know. In a lot of cases, it can feel a lot better.
There's so many questions.
Good. I love it. I love it. Give them to me.
I want to have longer and stronger orgasms. What do you suggest?
Yeah, we had talked about maybe covering this. So the real key here is, remember the chart, I can bring it up, where we kind of explored the sexual response cycle. I'm going to just click back and
People were asking about the part, about where they could find more information where it was cited.
Yes.
This chart or the
chart, and just I think sexual response in general.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So this would be adapted from like Masters and Johnson. I believe the original graph or chart didn't really account for excitement before. It was sort of like, you know, you have some kind of stimulus and then a response, and the response became the plateau. But the way that you sort of prolong and create a longer orgasmic experience is really by recognizing when you're in the plateau, trying to extend the plateau farther and farther and farther, kind of playing with, it's called edging, playing with your edge, playing with like, how far can I take this before like I'm going to lose control? Because that's essentially what's going to happen, what happens. You're overcome by an experience of orgasm that takes you from this like, oh, this is nice, this is nice, this is nice. So stay in the this is nice phase for as long as you can. When you feel yourself starting to go up, kind of back off and do something else that feels nice. But when it's really about playing with this zone here, and you have to get really familiar, no matter what your body is, you have to get really familiar with what it feels like when you hit this mark and you start to go up. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. So I hope that's helpful. But yes, this one chart is based on Masters and Johnson. The other chart here, this is from Clue. I think they have a fantastic resource here. Like this is the model that I felt was very like succinct, specific, but not overwhelming. Not too much detail.
Thank you. A lot of people have thanks for being so involved in the community chat, everybody. A lot of people want to hear a little more about edging. Can you kind of define it? And also some people are saying like, so intense, they feel like they're going to lose it, or can it end up overstimulating? Is there ever pain?
There can be pain depending on your personal experience of it. But the idea of edging is simply this: you're prolonging orgasm. You're doing whatever you can to avoid orgasm until you want yourself to experience it. So what that means is, like I said, knowing when your point of no return is. And that point of no return is I'm going through the motions of having an orgasm. And by prolonging that, the idea, although, you know, different bodies, different experiences, the idea is when you prolong that, you can actually increase the frequency of that peak. So there would be like your normal orgasm, but just pushing it off, pushing it off, pushing it off. It's like, all right, like when you push off taking a shower, like, you know, you need a shower, you got a shower, but you're just like super busy and you just like don't want to do it. And you're like, okay, I got to just do other things, you know, there's other priorities. And then like you realize like you got the funk and you got a shower. That shower feels amazing. That shower feels like your first shower ever. And that's kind of why people want to do it.
Great. I also feel there in this question, I feel like this is a question that comes up often of people saying that they're only able to masturbate via, like by watching porn or via sex toy. Is that something that will prohibit them from successfully masturbating on their own down the line? I feel like that's kind of a myth that people are curious about.
Yeah, And spot on, it's a myth. So what I like to think of is like we all kind of have a sexual planet that we live on, and it's like our repertoire. It's like, you know, you have your resources that you're used to using and things that you're really comfortable with. It's like, you know, your block or whatever, but then your neighborhood is like your fantasy world and all of these things. But we really have, rather than thinking about it on like a planetary scale, we have a sexual universe. We have endless capability. Like I said, the brain is the biggest sex organ. Like you can have any kind of sex you want in your mind. And there's like limitless possibilities. So if you have something that works for you, that's great. But just know that you're just like kind of circling the same block, right? It's like, that's fine. There's a lot of people that only know where they grew up, right? But there's so much advantage to like going to a different part of town, going to another country, going exploring different, you know, like going into outer space. Let's, you know, let's explore new terrain. And I think if you let yourself do that, then you can expand your experience and your repertoire to the point where it's like, I don't have to do that every single time. I have so many other things, so many tools at my disposal that I don't feel boxed in that I have to have sex feel this specific way, you know, but you gotta kind of have to like take the leap, and it can be scary.
Yes. There's a wonderful question in the chat, and I'm going to go away from our submitted Q&A, but if you have any suggestions for disabled folks, specifically issues with joint pain, muscle tension, where rhythmic movements are often painful, do you have any tips for them?
Yes, props. Supporting your body the way your body needs to be supported. So recognizing, and I think masturbation is a great way to figure out like, how do you feel most comfortable? Okay, and I think this is true for anybody's body, but particularly if you experience any pain, can you elevate the knees to a point that puts less pressure on your legs, especially if you're in a bottom position where, you know, the pressure of somebody else's body on top of you might be uncomfortable. But if you raise the legs, you're releasing some of the tension and the pressure on the joints. You know, there are difficulties with their hips. And so these are all also things that we should all be considering as possibilities for just expanding our repertoire. Who doesn't want a little extra pillow? You know what I mean? Like, get comfortable, get settled in, and figure out what feels really good to you, and then apply it. But then also it ties back into the aging piece. Our bodies aren't going to look like this and feel like this. I already have joint pain. I got a bad back. Like, I need support. So there's all kinds of things that we should be thinking about as ways to just take the concern away of this is a problem for me, and be like, this is what I need. This is what I need to feel supported. And so this is what I'm breaking out. And I think for some people, especially I know with myself and my female bodied folks, it can be hard to advocate for yourself and exactly what you need. But I think it's actually pretty sexy when you come to a sexual experience and you're like, this is what I know I need to come. It's got to be like this. I'm going to need a little like extra support. I need to move this pillow here. I'm going to need to just like be in this position. And this is what works for me and makes me feel the best. And framing it from that perspective, I think, is really helpful for partners too.
Thanks. Yeah, and as Maisha keeps saying, we're going to dive into communication next week. So y'all should just explore right now and just things. And also week 3, Sunali will talk about lots of techniques, and we'll really get into more. So keep coming as well to learn. I have a question for you.
Ooh.
Well, it's not my question, but I second it. Given how much and probably everyone has internalized or been taught shame around body, sexual exploration, centering my pleasure, how do we continue to unlearn and disrupt this cultural misogyny, racism, fat phobia, cis heteropatriarchy? What are some practices to continue to disrupt that thinking and unlearning?
Well, first of all, asking that question, number one. So thank you. and engaging with this, engaging with the fact that there is so much shame that has been heaped upon all of us is the area of our health and wellness that has, in my opinion, the most shame attached to it. And not only that, we have trauma. We have, real trauma that people carry with their experiences of sexuality. And on top of that, we have a culture of silence. So if something was not to your liking, we don't really encourage people to talk about that. So talking about that, talking about the fact that, the images that we see, the media that we consume favors specific types of bodies in regard to race, body size, age, gender presentation. When we talk about those things and we make those things visible, we are actually working to chip away at those structures that you mentioned. When we say, not only these people, but also me, I experience sexual pleasure and I own the way that I experience that, we are engaging and giving permission for other people to engage in the conversation, to then say, something terrible happened to me. Like, it's all connected. It is all connected. When we are silent about sex and pleasure, we are also silent about pain and trauma and the things that are wrong. So when we start a conversation about that felt really good, we're actually opening the door to people being like, but actually that was really bad. And we need to be having those conversations because culturally we haven't been having them. So this is where it starts, y'all. You are here, you are in it, you are participating, you are a piece of it. You will take this on, and it's why I do what I do, because I certainly felt like I didn't fit a model of any type of positive sexuality growing up. And so here we are, this is the work, and it looks different to everybody, but you just asking that question was an amazing feat. There are 600 people on this call. So they all heard you, and that's beautiful.
Absolutely. And I think too, it's important to know, like, leaning into whatever you enjoy, whether that's like your own kink or BDSM, is really fighting against racism, sexism, classism. So stay true to what feels good to you, and lean into that fully, and don't ever shy away from it, because just by expressing those sexual liberties that we haven't always been afforded is really powerful.
It's true.
I got another question.
Cool.
Someone was saying, I know a few people in the chat when you were talking about masturbating were saying they were going to practice on their partner.
Cool.
And someone was asking, my partner gets jealous when I masturbate. Any tips on how to navigate that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty common. And I'll tell you the root of that. It's this kind of belief that you only have enough sexual energy for certain things. And that when you're with somebody, all of that energy it's supposed to be channeled towards them. And remember, I talked about, we can live on our sexual planet or we can explore the sexual universe. That might not fly as an analogy for them, but letting them know that your masturbation practice, and you can frame it like that, it's not really related to them. It is a part of you, your health and wellness and your self-care and your exploration. And sometimes you need that release without the layers that sometimes get added to partnered sex that are someone else's thoughts and feelings and how they want to be treated in a shared sexual experience. You don't really have to check in. I mean, you kind of just have to be like, do I want to masturbate or not? Do I have the time and resources? Yeah, okay, cool. But you don't necessarily have to negotiate with yourself about that, which can be really freeing and can be a nice way for you to connect with your sexuality. One thing that I like to tell my clients too is, if you want to sell this, be like, you know what? Sometimes I need to masturbate to like open myself up to being sexual again, because listen, times are hard right now. And sometimes the easiest entry point into just having that positive, pleasurable experience can open the valve a little bit and allow your sexuality to flow even more. So if you want to twist it to something that's a little bit more like, it's not about you, but it can be about you if you let me just do what I want, that's one way to approach it, because a lot of people do need that. So part of it is about communication, which you'll learn more about next week. But some of it is like getting really clear about how you use masturbation, how it factors into your sexual universe, and being able to like talk that through with your partner, which isn't easy, but I think some of this framing is helpful, and people can kind of go, okay, yeah, I get it. It's not about me. It's not that you don't desire me. It's about like, this has everything to do with your sexuality.
I have an interesting question that I feel someone asked, but I feel like I relate so much is, how do you deal with getting turned off by your partner, but not as easily turned off via porn or via masturbation?
So the question is, how do you deal with it?
Yes, that is the question.
Yeah, I mean, we know that in long-term partnership, attraction, that sexual desire does decrease over time. And what that looks like for every couple is different. But we know that, like, you know, if you start out having a lot of sex, it's gonna drop. If you start having a little sex, that's still gonna drop. So that is part of being in a loving, caring, supportive relationship. You know the intricacies of each other's lives. You know when they had something that didn't agree with their stomach the night before, okay? And that's not necessarily a sexy type of situation. Whereas in porn, you don't know these people. You don't know what they ate. You don't know what they smell like. You know, it's like it's new, it's exciting. We are novelty seekers. We want that. It's like eye candy. It's like, give me more. Like, what is this? It's crazy. It's new. So, you know, cutting ourselves some slack and being like, okay, there are definitely reasons why it's difficult to muster sexual energy for somebody who is like always here. And we want them to be always there. We love them, you know, but like, we don't necessarily desire them in the same way that we might have early on in the relationship. And that is natural. That's a natural experience. And I think like figuring out ways to make the relationship more novel. This is definitely Esther Perel being channeled through me. But figuring out ways to bring novelty forward in the relationship can actually help. So sometimes it is toys, sometimes it is a date night, sometimes it is, you know, reconnecting in a different way with your partner. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So true. We're always after like shiny new objects.
It's okay. That's human nature. That's human nature.
You could try not seeing your partner for a little while. It makes you, I do that sometimes.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yes.
I know a lot of people, Maisha, we've done a lot of classes together and we talk about people asking, but a bunch of people have said, tell me about internal orgasms. Tell me about squirting and multiple orgasms. What do you have to say about that tonight? And everyone, we have lots of time. We all have lots of stuff to offer you, but in a few minutes, how do we talk about those things?
How we talk about them is we go to Freud first. Okay, so Freud is kind of the culprit for propagating the myth that there is such a distinction between a vaginal or mature orgasm versus a clitoral immature orgasm. So he associated the behavior that we talked about earlier on in the webinar of grinding on things like, you know, we see kids do this, right? So he was observing these things and labeling that as like, well, that's clearly like how young girls figure out their sexuality and maybe can obtain an orgasm. But when they get older, they've got to get with the program. They've got to get with marriage and being penetrated, because that's how men get their pleasure. So we've got a dichotomy here, and when there is a psychological distress, there might be something going on there with, you know, trying to get these patients to figure out how to transition into a vaginal orgasm. And it's just wrong. It's just wrong. We don't have a lot of nerve endings in our vaginal canals as female-bodied folks because we deliver babies through them. Okay, so it would be it would be even more painful for us to have the type of nerve endings that we have in our clitoris inside our vaginal cavity, because a human being has the potential of passing through there. So,
I'm like, I can't imagine a human being like coming up, rubbing against my clit.
Word. So we have this wonderful structure. And honestly, when people say this is, you know, there might be people going off in the chat being like, I have had a vaginal orgasm. Well, guess what? You probably had
They're not really.
a contraction. Okay, cool. But you may have experienced a contraction in your vaginal cavity because of, you know, residual arousal of your clitoris. And you see how bulbous these are. I mean, this is like the size of my finger, like the depth of my finger. And so these can feel like they're internal structures because they are. I mean, they are slightly internal. But what we know about where female-bodied folks receive the most pleasure is really between the first 2 inches of the vaginal cavity, which is like coincidentally about how like thick this, or, you know, whatever, in an expanded form, like it's about as thick as like this would get. In addition to that, we have a structure, and I don't have a chart, but you can look it up. It's called the Skene's gland. There's also some debate about what it's called. And of course, we debate all of this stuff because it's a woman's body. That's my opinion. You know, I'm like, whatever it is, we have it. And people have studied it. It's an organ that is thought to be analogous to the male prostate. So men have prostates in their anus. Women have this female prostate that is internal, and it's on the top wall of the vaginal opening. Again, 1 to 2 inches within the vaginal cavity. This structure also becomes engorged. And for those people who are able to experience ejaculation, it fills with fluid that other, you know, again, lots of debate. What is the fluid? It is analogous also to prostatic fluid mixed with other things. It comes through the urethra, so there's traces of urea in it. A lot of people ask that question too. So all of these structures, just keep in mind, all of these structures are really focused on the, you know, they're really concentrated, I should say, either on the external portion of the vulva or just inside the vaginal cavity. You know, there's not a lot of action for female-bodied folks deep within the vaginal cavity. That we know. And again, this comes back to the orgasm gap. If we're not properly getting aroused in the places that are literally designated for arousal and pleasure, then how are we going to experience orgasm? So my suggestion is you play around with the exercises that I gave and really see, like, can you feel the structures that I'm talking about? You actually can feel these little like arms and these little fingers, and you can feel the Skene's gland, because when you stimulate it just inside your vagina, it becomes ridged and a bit hard. And so you're going to be able to feel that structure and figure out how you like to be stimulated there. So those are all my points and tips. With multiple orgasms, you know, there's lots of theories about this as well. My concern is, what's the quality of the orgasms that you're having to begin with? You know, because one can be enough. And also, when we start focusing on the numbers, then we're not focusing on the pleasure. And that's the trick. Remember, the brain is the biggest sex organ. So if you're going into experience thinking, am I going to have multiple orgasms? You are sure to not have multiple orgasms, or maybe an orgasm at all. The trick is not thinking about it and allowing yourself to really, truly, deeply on a bodily soul, if you believe it, you know, plane, like deep within you, feel pleasure. And that's a feat in and of itself. So start there and build from there.
Yes, thank you. The comments, they honestly have given me so much life this evening. Um, but we only have 2 more minutes, so time for one more question, but I'm gonna squeeze like a mini question in the
Okay.
question. The last question is, should you expect to come every time you masturbate? And then within that, someone asked that their partner has an extremely small and sensitive clit, and if you had a couple tips on just how to navigate that and pleasure them.
Okay, cool. Yeah. First of all, no, I don't think you should expect to orgasm because that's a lot of pressure and that can also interfere with your experience of having sex either with yourself or with a partner. So being open to whatever happens, especially if it's fun while you're having it, you know what I mean? Like that's actually the best way to, I don't want to say ensure orgasm, but certainly like create an ambiance that is conducive to orgasm. It's like go into it thinking that you're going to have a good time and know that you're going to need to communicate. And when things like kind of get off the rails, you redirect and redirect it towards your own pleasure. But yeah, sometimes it doesn't happen for any number of reasons, and that's okay. That could just be like, okay, that was today. What's tomorrow? Next thing, you know. So first is just like not putting any pressure on yourself to have that experience every time. Some people are super lucky. I'll say that. And then the second question was with regard to like a smaller clitoris.
Oh.
Yeah. So I wonder, the thing that this question makes me wonder is how that person experiences pleasure. And if they have developed any tips or tricks or know like how they like to be stimulated. Because it's, in this case, it may not be about the actual size of the clitoris. Like because again, we really do think of the clitoris as just this. And sometimes this will not emerge. For some people, you're never going to see this. You will never see this. So there's still a lot to explore with touching the clitoral hood. Like I said, a lot of people find that really stimulating, and then really focusing on stimulating the labia. So spending a lot of time here, either with your hands or orally, or even with a toy. You know, sometimes we think of partnered sex as like, we got to just use what what God gave us or the goddess gave us. Bring in instruments of pleasure to move things forward. So if there's something that works for their body, then I say, bring it on, embrace it, use whatever you can.